Well, I say good morning to everybody. I was wondering how many people had gotten the monthly newsletter from the NAWCC, and all I had to do was go in and look at the uh, chapter news and happenings on the NAWCC forum to see that I think 120 or 130 people have viewed last week's Zoom meeting. And then if I go to the YouTube channel and look, and there's another 40 people over there. So I thought, wow, a bunch of those newsletters must have gone out because in it mentions this Zoom meeting. So I guess we're having a good time. I guess we're having a good time.
Good press.
The another thing I wanted to mention, the NAWCC, you might have seen in that news. Did I see it in the newsletter? But the NAWCC is putting out a calendar, the 2024 calendar, and it has 12 high quality pictures of clocks you can enjoy throughout the year. And it also then has a bonus of 12 more clocks that you can download and enjoy. It measures 11 by 17. I thought, just what I need is a calendar that I want, not a calendar that arrives in my mailbox and asks for money. So that's fun always. I got the Buckeye Chapter 23 newsletter this week. I don't know if you're in this area. That's Ohio. I should let some of these people in. That's Ohio. And they're having an event this weekend. They have several marts throughout the year, and sometimes they're coordinated with other chapters around about, and other times they're not. But I'm going to mention their event Saturday, October 7th from noon to 4 o'clock. I'll put a trace to it so you can find out. There's a nice map and you can get to it. You can also get on their mailing list if you're in that part of the country. But they have nice events. Also, this weekend, October 7th, if you're in the Louisville area or in Kentucky, we have the Clocktoberfest, which is advertised as the best clock and watch mart in Louisville. Pretty easy to say. I think it's the only one, right? So, but I know we were supposed to RSVP, but that's going to be a good time. It always seems that more people show up than RSVP. I'm putting a special plug into the watch crowd here in Louisville to see if we can get some of those to show up. It's always nice. In fact, I had somebody ask me, how do I liquidate my uncle's Rolex collection? I said, come to the Clocktoberfest. I think Tom Engel is said he was going to drop in there, and he's a great watch guy, knows lots about those Rolexes. Remember the S-Town Zoom meeting, October 8th between 1 and 3 o'clock. That's there's a link I'll put out for that, but it's going to talk about those clocks that are on display at the National Museum. The Mideastern Regional which is in York, Pennsylvania. Do we know who the board rep is going to be for that? Bob, you're traveling to York for that? No?
No, I'm like Sherry. I don't remember who the rep is.
Okay.
Off the top
I'm
of my
trying
head.
to think and nothing's happening.
Good morning, Sherry.
I can look
It's
it
not
up.
working.
It's a little known fact that at every one of these regionals, there's a board member, and they usually set them up with a table or something. And it's always nice to interface with the board members because you can say to them, dude or dudette, hey, what's going on and how can I get involved? So the North Coast Regional is in November also, 10th and the 11th of November. And that's actually it's in Strongville, Ohio. I used to think that was in Indiana, but it's not. It's in Strongville, Ohio. And so we'll put a plug out for them. And then only because people confuse us with the chapter out in Lexington, I'll put a plug out for the Lexington, which is the first regional of the year. If you said, hey, I didn't go to any regionals this year, but next year I'm going to go to one. Well, the Lexington one is the first one of the year, and it happens in January 19th and 20th. So that'll be the end of my announcements for today. There'll be links to all of those on the letter that comes out and the recording. And you can also follow up on some of these announcements by going to the forum, to the chapter happenings, announcements, news and happenings, and look at last week's or look at this week's Zoom meeting. So that's great. I kind of got on the topic of bushing clocks and reviewing that by reading an article in Horological Times, which is the AWCI's publication. And that article was actually about how long does a pivot last? And I thought, well, pivots wear out in watches more than plates. Because the pivots are usually in a jewel, which is a stone, and they don't wear out. It comes down to the softest of materials loses. And in the clocks, that is the plates. In the certification as a clock maker with the AWCI, they point out that there are only 4 reasons to bush a pivot hole in a clock plate. One is the pivot has been recut and it no longer fits in the hole in the plate. The second is the hole has been worn into an oval that we see regularly, or holes have been punched up. And they use that terminology, punched up. We can call it a lot of different things, but as clock restorers, we see that happens regularly. I don't know. There must have been a period of time in which tools were made to do that. I want to show you a couple of pictures here of what punching up is all about. See if I can get there from here. This is from a German wall regulator I was working on, and you can see there's this arc tool that's been used to pound all around the plate and close a hole that this repairer decided was worn into an oval. And so he used this tool and banged it up. Some people or punch it up or mar it up. There's a lot of words for it. In this same clock, you can see he attacked several different holes in the plate. All of these images came from the same clock. Here you can see very clearly the shape of that tool that was used to punch up. Not only use this tool, but if you look a little to the right there, you can see it looks like he used an awl. Or sometimes when I see them, I think they didn't even use an awl. They used a nail to punch it up. Just so that you know, this restorer not only did it on the outside of the plates, but he then turned to the inside of the plates, and you can see very clearly those round punches around that one hole, and there's that tool up a little further to the right, and it looks like he attacked every hole inside and outside of the plates. It was the last reason they say to bush a clock is because the clockmaker had made a mistake in placing the hole. Now, don't often see that, but I have found that clocks have been rebushed and the bushing was not put in the right location, and therefore it causes the gears to bind because they're too close together. But those are the only reasons that clockmaker's standard says for rebushing a hole. Now, if you're not a restorer, but you're a collector, now that you have an idea that's of what punching up looks like, or if a hole has become oval, if you're looking at a clock to purchase a clock, you can consider these things and say, hey, this is going to have to be rebushed. It's going to have bushing work done to it. The standard says that if the hole is round, don't do anything to it. You can have a pivot that's loose in a hole, but as long as it's round, they say that you shouldn't rebush it, because it wasn't until particularly in American clocks, mass production could then control the tolerances of holes. Much older clocks, and I've seen some of the English bell-top ringers, I call them, where the hole is round and the pivot is just kind of loose in there. Well, they didn't have mass production in order to produce tight tolerances, but the clockmaker standard says if it's round, it doesn't need to be rebushed. Now, there's several ways to rebush. Tom, what's your favorite tool when the decision has been made to rebush a hole in a plate of a clock?
I have a KWM bushing tool that I use. I have done hand bushing with the KWM tools. There is a handheld unit that's much less expensive, and you can get very good results. It's just mainly a matter of keeping the tool perpendicular to the plate as you're opening up the hole. Going back to the round, saying if it's round, it doesn't need to be bushed. The only argument I would have against that is the other thing that they said when it needs to be rebushed is if the pivot has been cut down and it's too sloppy in there because the pivot is just so small, then something needs to be done. Either repivot to bring it back up to a decent size, or to put a bushing in.
Right.
What is too sloppy mean? I mean, is there a kind of standard for something like that? Because I've got one that I'm working on or considering working on that it won't stay running because it'll shut down. How do you know it's too sloppy?
That's a tough question to answer. It's more a matter of feel. There are some benchmarks I've read as far as the degree of tilt, that when you hold the arbor up into the plate, if it tilts like 7 degrees or something, more than 7 degrees, then you probably do need to bush it. One thing that I'll do is I'll hold the pivot in the plate and kind of rotate it around, and if it leans about the same angle all the way around, it kind of goes back to Frank's point that it's more than likely a round hole. If it leans real far in one direction or another, then it's more than likely worn to that side. So you more than likely have an oval hole. But it's a very, there is no true answer to exactly when it needs to be bushed. It's really just a matter of feel, because a lot plays into it, not just the shape of the hole, but also the thickness of the plate.
Right.
If you've got a real thin plate, it'll tilt a lot. If it's a real thick plate, then you have a lot more meat there to hold the thing vertical.
Mhm. Good point.
Also, I found that even before you take the movement apart, if you can hold the movement up and take probably the gear right below that particular pivot and put pressure one way and pressure in the other and watch that pivot. If it's moving one way and moving the other and you've got some pretty good slop, you're probably you've got an oval situation, and that's when you need to repivot.
Mhm.
Yeah, a lot of
Another
times.
little detail to that, it's somewhat dependent on how fine or coarse the gear teeth are cut. Coarse gear teeth are a little more tolerant to center distance variations.
Good point. If you've got like a 30-hour OG American movement, they've got so much slop in them, it's amazing, and they'll continue to run. If you've got a beautiful French clock with tiny pivots, doesn't take much wear to throw one of those off.
Well, I assure you, I'm not working on any fine French
Yeah.
clocks.
Yeah, don't
Not
start
even here.
Going back to Bob's point, though, in terms of rocking them back and forth, a lot of times I will use the C clamp on the mainspring if you've got a spring-driven movement, and let it down into that clamp, and from there you can actually grab that great wheel and rock the things back and forth.
Mhm.
But yes, that's usually where I start. If the movement is too dirty, you may need to clean it first, put it all back together, and then check those. But if the movement is in pretty decent shape, I'll do that before I even take the clock apart, just to see how bad it is and how much issues I'm going to have when I get into it.
Right. And there are other signs, if you're shopping a mart or shopping in an establishment and you're looking at a clock and you're looking at the movement. The reason why a plate gets worn, or in the case of a watch, a pivot gets worn, is because there was lack of lubrication, or the lubrication has become contaminated, either by dust or something. But once the oil is contaminated, it usually changes color. You can look at a pivot in a clock movement without having to take it out of the case and all, and look and see if there's a black ring around the pivot. You can say, well, that pivot in that hole is the lubrication is contaminated. A lot of times it's contaminated by brass filings. Once it starts to wear, it goes pretty quickly. Good point to make is that when people say, how often should my clock be lubricated? There's different standards, but once it runs dry, it's then the softest metal is losing the battle, and it will wear. So that's good.
Can we get back real quick to the hammer time you guys are talking about?
Yeah.
First, these are, for give an idea. These are for so if you're hammering that, you're actually work hardening that brass, right? So is it then going to be longer until you rebush? Right?
If it's going to be harder to bush. The brass is going to be harder. I don't think you're going to add life to it, because while you're hammering it, you're also thinning the plate and changing the shape of the surface that the pivot is riding on. So you may be riding on less of a shoulder inside the plate when you start pounding it and changing the shape of that hole. To Tom's point, was the pivot long enough to go all the way through? Is it too short? Well, is it riding on the full depth of the plate? Is it just sitting on a ridge now because it's been pounded? Yeah. And Eric, I confess I have a set of those tools, and most often I see them used. Those tools have been used in cuckoo clocks. where, because it has that retracting pin where you can
Yeah.
line it up and you can put it right on there. And it.
So just so I'm clear, hammering good, all right, hammering bad, bushing good.
Well,
Sure.
obviously it worked temporarily because otherwise they wouldn't have used it. So I'm
Hmm.
probably sure probably for 6 months or a year, 2 years, probably until it got out of warranty for the repairman,
Yeah.
it was still functioning pretty well.
I gotta
But what
imagine those
amazes
the
me
clocks.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say the clocks were just clocks, right? They
Yeah.
weren't
Yeah.
historical pieces. They weren't anything to collect. They were just clocks.
Yeah.
Like
They're
the
trying to
ones
keep
I
it
work
whole.
on.
But
Yeah,
it's
the
one
Ameri-
thing for a home repairman to do it, but when a professional is doing something like that, you kind of frown on it. So when somebody's charging you money to beat the plate to death, but it always struck me as it'd be something that a repairman would do so they didn't have to take the movement apart, because a lot of the people are afraid of the mainsprings.
Yeah.
But when Frank showed that one where it was done on the outside and the inside, obviously they took the whole thing apart and beat it to death. But maybe that was before they had access to bushings or something.
Yeah, but those punches like Eric has, that puts a consistent dimpling all the way around it, ring around it, tightens that entire hole up evenly. Isn't that the best way to go?
Well,
I have a set of those punches,
well,
which I use.
yeah, once you have
Curious what the practice was. Did these craftsmen, I guess if you call them craftsmen, they beat on it until it keep trying the pin it into the hole until it fits, or did they overbeat on it and then ream the hole back out?
yeah,
What was typically done.
any kind of punching up, I think that's what it is you punch it to that's too small and then you ream it back out to the right size.
The big with fun is more to just closing a hole. As we mentioned, one of the on the clock stand is if a hole has turned open. If you shape, the reason for that got a constant wear on that hole. I've seen have been 20, 30 thousandths the opposite side. So in order to bring back center, opposite side, open with a booch and then pushing. So you're basically doing depthing work. You have to make sure that you that hole back where it was originally on the plate. If you beat out of it on one side, it's just work whether you're back to the center. And the other thing is closing, Bill, you mentioned closing it all the way down, yeah, but not consistent all the way through the rest of the plate. If thick plate, so you punch.
Tom, excuse me, Tom, you're breaking up. You're breaking up your audio is, but the point Tom is making is the location of the hole. Many of these repair literature say that you take a file, a pin file, and file in the opposite direction of the wear, so that when you do go to drilling out, reaming out, all of those things, that you don't move the location of the hole, particularly in some of the European clocks, where if you move the hole, you're going to affect the depth of the teeth in gears, and it's very important to get it right. And if you're going to use any of the tools for punching up, as Tom says, if you close one side, or if that's why they say if you're going to be a clock maker, you're going to see a punched up plate, you're going to rebush it. So that's a whole too, depthing tools and all to make sure holes are in the right locations. All of those things are important tools to understand. All right. Well,
Talk, another detail, is why the hole actually moves over. And by the very nature of gears, uh, all gears have what they call a pressure angle, and gears, two matched together will tend to separate based on that pressure angle. In high quality gearing, the spur gears, 20 degrees is about it, meaning that you've got two ramps separating the shafts by that force equal to the transmitting force.
mhm,
So the very nature of the gear tooth design forces shafts apart, and therefore wear, and actually both shafts, not just one, but the pivot, the smaller one tends to take the most beating.
mhm. And people with experience in rebuilding clocks will often say, well, it's the number 2 gear. Hermley movement, it's the number 2 gear, that because of the torque, you know. So all of those things are fun.
If anybody dealt with one of the Seth Thomas, the movements, I don't know if it's a 41 or something that they used a lot in their kitchen clocks and shelf clocks. The one time side bushing, I think it's on the second gear. That's the one that always wears on the front plate where the pinion is. Can I ask a technical question? I've got a friend of mine that has bought a fairly historical Kentucky tall case clock. And before he took possession of it, they sent it down to Nashville and had the movement worked on to the tune of a year wait and I think $1,500 fee for doing it. And he took it out to, they've got a farm out in Virginia that he moved it out to, and he had trouble getting the thing to strike correctly. And I had looked at the movement and it was running fine when I put it on my test stand. So I gave it back to him. Well, he took it to a clockmaker out in that area, and he recommended that he rebuild the whole thing again to the tune of $2,000. And one of the things he included a couple pictures, and when the clock guy in Nashville rebushed some of the pivots, he didn't use, a tall case clock will have, a fairly thick. Well, apparently he used the normal sized bushings, and so they didn't come all the way to the front surface. And he was recommending that these be replaced and stuff like that. And my friend Dick asked me whether I would recommend doing that, and I said, really, the movement's running fine. And I said, and what my suggestion was, yeah, that might wear out in 20 years versus 25 years if you had the full size bushing. I mean, do you see any reason to replace those bushings? I mean, I cannot see that's going to, I mean, I think this guy was acting like, well, in 6 months, that'll be worn out. I mean, you probably had the normal size bushing for a kitchen clock movement. I mean, I didn't like the looks of it, but in the same hand, I certainly wouldn't recommend redoing the whole thing. What's your opinion of it?
If it's still running, or
You're breaking up, Tom. Do you think leave it alone? I would, yeah.
Yeah, but it's not striking correctly, he said. That's what he's interested in. It's not going to solve that problem.
No, not a bit. Yeah. The movement itself is running fine. Yeah.
I think that comes down to craftsmanship.
Yeah, it's aesthetically it is not pleasing, although you really had to look closely because there wasn't there probably maybe a millimeter of depth, so probably 90% of the bushing was there, but it didn't come all the way up where you had a sinkhole or anything like that. But and I hadn't even really noticed it because I wasn't tearing the movement down or anything.
No. And a lot of times in the repairs, sometimes you say, yep, somebody fixed it versus somebody restored it. It comes down to craftsmanship. I won't say the name of the store here in Louisville, but I've seen their craftsmanship.
Well, I do believe this clock group down in Nashville is got a good reputation. So I don't think they did a half-assed job. But it's probably one of these situations where it's like, well, we'll use this, and we don't have any right now. So,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't recommend redoing the whole thing for
And-
that reason.
And when it comes to doing bushings, one of the points in the AWCI standard says that they should be as the least conspicuous. So you should hardly be able to tell. There's an excellent article in a bulletin last year about making bushings and having them almost be non-detectable in like German movements, where the weep holes are deep. I'll put a link to that if I can find it again, but it's craftsmanship. So it's as we say, you're either a clock fixer or a clock maker. You're right. So
Well, I can tell you where I am right now.
got to get through fixing them first, right?
Yeah.
So you can understand how they work.
Yeah, well, that's where I am.
And then we all are working on our craftsmanship. All right. Well, is anybody else have anything they'd like to throw into this conversation, or announcements or anything before we recognize that Frank's cup is empty?
No, good discussion.
All right.
Yeah.
Good talk.
Well,
Remember, when you get these
Wait.
invitations, you can forward them to anybody else that you think might enjoy dropping in, or you can head them to the forum and they can follow up and look and see what's going on. Eric.
real quick, I got a phone call the other day from, I believe her name was Victoria. She is from that radio station that was at the Maker Faire that interviewed you.
Mhm.
She is ecstatic, excited. Her and I think her son are going to, Tom, hopefully they've RSVP'd. They want to bring a clock to show off at Clocktoberfest.
Yeah.
Where they are at is the community radio station. They have people from the community coming in and doing a radio show. And I talked with them about the idea of bringing in some clock people to do a radio show on their station. And they love the idea to come in, talk about maybe record a couple of episodes, talk about the public clocks of Louisville, talk about historical pieces. So think about that, mull that in your head, noodle on it, whatever you're.
What was her name, Eric?
Victoria?
I think it was Victoria. I gotta find her card. She gave me her card and I can't.
I don't have an RSVP. No.
Okay.
All right. Well,
Also, I talked to Pat Higdon, the local people here. I talked the night before last. Mary Ann was in the hospital with pneumonia. And she's supposed to get out yesterday. I think I need to call him back and see if she was able to get out, but she'd been in intensive care for like 3 days, I think. When she got to the hospital, she had a 70% oxygen level and 104-degree temperature. So she was in intensive care for 3 days. And then they let her out. And the next day she was back again. They let her out a little bit soon. But when I talked to him Monday, I think her oxygen level was back up to normal. She was off oxygen and her temperature and breathing were good. So hopefully she's over the worst of it. So anybody that's had pneumonia knows how horrible that can be.
yeah. Yes. And there's more than pneumonia out there. There's RSP, there's COVID, there's the virus, the flu, so if you're going to be around a lot of people, remember to mask up, wash your hands. Please don't stand so close to me. We'll see you all next week.
Take care.
Right. Bye-bye.